As we begin to think about the components of communication, we will be talking about listening. And today the question is, what is listening? Are you really listening? Of all the component skills of communication, which include speaking, writing, reading, and listening, for most people, listening is the hardest skill to learn. And yet, it's one of the most important of all the communication skills. In fact, according to John Marshall, who was a Supreme Court justice, to listen well is as powerful a means of communication and influence as to talk. Sometimes we may hear what someone is saying without really listening. In your opinion, what's the difference between hearing and listening? Successful communication depends on active listening. What's the difference, in your opinion, between passive listening and active listening? Now we're going to talk about some things that you can do to be an active listener. The first thing you need to do is to be attentive. Focus on the speaker. Secondly, use nonverbal actions to show that you are listening. Nonverbal actions would be body language of any kind, a relaxed posture, nodding your head in agreement, facial expressions, a relaxed body expression, and most importantly, eye contact can all show that you're actively listening. The third thing to do to be an active listener is to listen with an accepting attitude. This means to be open to what the speaker is saying. Here's an example of what looks like an active listening situation. Notice that there's focus, eye contact, and openness to the person who's speaking. The fourth thing that you can do to be an active listener is to ask some questions once in a while as the speaker is talking to demonstrate that you're truly interested in what's being said. And the fifth thing you can do is use reflections and restatements frequently to try and let the person know that you think that what they're saying is this, and you can test for understanding. This is a way of mirroring what the person is saying. To practice mirroring, you should restate what you hear in your own words to show that you understand. The sixth thing you can do to be an active listener is to use encouraging words to show that you're listening and to invite the speaker to continue. Things like, I see, or right, tell me more, sounds like you have some ideas on this, or I'm interested in what you have to say. Let's talk. Here are some things to avoid while being an active listener. The most important thing to avoid while actively listening to someone is to not interrupt as they're speaking. Secondly, don't interrogate the speaker. That means limit the number of questions that you ask so that you're not drilling them. Don't try to think of your own response in your head while you're listening. This takes your focus off what's being said and puts it on what you're thinking about instead. Fourth, don't change the subject. That shows that you're not really listening. The fifth thing to keep in mind is don't be judgmental. Avoid phrases like, are you sure? You shouldn't feel that way. It's not that bad. You're making something out of nothing. That's a dumb question. According to Sean Covey, the author of The 7 Habits of Highly Effective Teens, there are 5 different poor listening styles. Are you guilty of any of these? These poor listening styles include spacing out, pretend listening, selective listening, word listening, and self-centered listening, which includes judging, advising, and probing. Spacing out happens when we're so tuned out to what someone's saying that it's like we're in another world. Here's a good example of somebody that's spacing out. Pretend listening happens when someone's not really listening but acts like they are because they make comments once in a while as the speaker is talking by saying sort of benign things such as, yeah, awesome. Selective listening means that the listener's only paying attention to certain parts of the conversation, parts that interest him, while ignoring all the rest. In this cartoon, you'll see that the woman is saying Al Gore's son was arrested in a Prius going over 100 miles per hour with possession of marijuana and prescription drugs. And the man, in response, says, wow, a Prius can do 100 miles per hour? Good example of how he's keying in to only a small portion of the conversation while ignoring all the rest. The 4th poor listening style is word listening. This means that you pay attention only to the words that someone is saying and not to their body language. If you ignore body language, you might be missing the deeper meaning of what's being said. The 5th poor listening style is called self-centered listening. This happens when we hear everything only from our own point of view and not the point of view of the speaker. There are basically 3 types of self-centered listening. The first type of self-centered listening is judging. This happens when we make judgments about the speaker as they are speaking instead of listening. The second type of self-centered listening is called advising. This is when the listener gives advice instead of just listening. Back in my day, blah, blah, blah. It's a good example of giving advice rather than listening. And the third type of self-centered listening is called probing or questioning. This happens when we question and try to dig up emotions before the speaker is really ready to share them. Does this ever happen to you when you have a conversation with your parents? How was school today? What did you have for lunch? Do you have any homework? Did anything funny happen today? Does this sound familiar to you?